Hello, sorry.
Hello.
I'm
Oh,
just
good.
madly trying to get these last couple of questions in
Oh, that's fine.
because I didn't do them earlier because I sent you an email back with some questions and then I went,
Did you?
okay, yeah, and then
Didn't see that,
that's
sorry.
all right.
But on the brighter note, I've just had a phone call from Sally Cap.
Oh, really?
She sent her apologies for not coming, but she has to greet the Governor General, so I said that's okay.
Oh my God. Well, it was just on the off chance. One of the very, I've had an email since I closed things and someone's on about drones. Just
obviously this session is not for them. Though I suppose they've seen it through Facebook and that's why they don't get what we're...
No, it's more they're saying, drones with privacy and,
Yes.
Hi everyone, Tom here.
Hi Tom, how are you?
Very good, very well.
Excellent.
We've got Susan and Angus there as well, and Ben as well.
Have we?
Hi,
I can't see. I can't see you. Oh, okay. Yes. Hi Angus. Hi Susan. Thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you very much. Apologies if it looks like I'm kind of staring up. It's just the way my screens are set up.
That's okay. You can say, oh, Angus rolled his eyes a lot. Nice to meet you, Susan.
Hi everyone. Nice to meet you too, Janet.
Great. And Ben.
I just turned, I'll be hidden for most of the time, but I thought I'll pop in for now. Slideshow. So I'm just trying to get things so that I can actually...
That's great. So guys, the way that we'll go is I'll do the intro and plus all the acknowledgements and the disclaimers and all of that sort of stuff. A little bit about the vertical living sector. And also then, just as we agreed, I'll pose the question that we wrote in the blue and then I'll just say, Angus or Susan, would you care to respond in terms of the Act? Just something like that, and you can launch into whichever. And so I'll just be doing that handover each time and then come back to Tom. And then we're going to discuss more about the questions that have come in and what they've asked about it. So, and I'm also making that statement at the beginning about the focus of what you'll be contributing.
Yeah, certainly. And if participants do have questions regarding government policy or the like, those are probably, as I said, best directed to the Minister, but we're happy to take anything on notice.
Yeah, and so look, if there's something that you feel like you'd like to contribute, you're more than welcome, but we've structured it just so you respond to the points that you have responded to, and you can just put emphasis or change as you would. I've just had a phone call from Sally Cap, who's apologised that she couldn't attend this evening's webinar because she's greeting the Governor General, but I said, okay. But Councillor Nick Rees will be on the viewing as an attendee. So just for your information, and Tom knows this, that about 2 weeks ago, Future Melbourne put up a motion to get apartment living in City of Melbourne on the agenda. And because it really hasn't been a focus up until now, because really the dynamics have changed in the City of Melbourne quite substantially. So that they're moving in that direction. So that motion was universally passed, and they're holding a workshop next week to try and get some of the key stakeholders together about this. Their initial focus was about COVID, but it's just the beginning to move on. And I must admit, it did come from an article that I wrote in Docklands News about it. So anyway, there's a bit of cutting and pasting going on there, but I don't mind.
Just nice to get some.
Yeah, well, you know what it's like, Tom. You just go. It's you keep being the squeaky wheel, and sometimes it turns.
Okay, so that should be that starting screen. All right, so okay, Okay, so yeah, if everyone's happy with
Yeah.
their audio and stuff, I think
Sounds
everything, that was pretty good, wasn't it, Jeanette? All right.
Sounds good. Ben, your writing is in reverse.
Which writing?
Your Docklands coming out of COVID. Yep.
Mine? Oh, my background.
Yes.
You won't see mine anyway because I'm
Okay.
about to disappear again. So,
Great. And also, guys, just to let you know, we're running a number of polls during here, just basically to try and get, well, just a few snapshots about who's actually on this. We've got approaching 150 registrations, so that's not bad for a small, you know, community group to kind of get that. So we're quite pleased.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and you know, even if just 2/3 of those turn up, that's still a very good turnout. So
Well, yeah.
and likely the profile of these people that are attending, that these will be the decision makers in these quite large high-rise. So it's the right people that you've targeted.
And there's a lot. We've had a lot of building management people come on board too. I think what happened is the notice went to them, and rather than put it onto the IOCs, they've actually kind of gone, actually, we need to go to that.
Mm.
So
there was a good dozen of them all registered this morning, which was, yeah. Yep.
But you just go, well, okay, if they feel that this would be of benefit to them, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So Ben, can we see who's actually, how many have logged on so far?
No, I can't, not until I hit the button. But once
Yep.
I hit the button, then we're talking to everybody. So
Right.
the only thing we can do is chat. So if everyone has in their control center, you'll find chat. You should have the ability just to chat to within panelists or panelists and hosts, I think it's called, in the chat window. If not, that will appear in a sec once I,
Okay.
so I'm just trying to load up. Sorry, I'm just loading up the rest of my little screens. So I'm not reversed now. The PowerPoint was okay, wasn't it? The actual screen share, yeah, with the Ghostbusters, yeah. So I've got my Q&A panels.
Yeah, I can't see any chat button at the moment on this.
Okay.
I think it,
Oh,
it
yeah.
does come up when it starts.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is. It's Webinar's a bit different. Okay. All right. So we'll I'll let Jenna, I'll give you a bit of a heads up in chat when I think it's getting close with some numbers. And Dan hasn't had anyone yet. Just checking that those Dan and Aditi haven't been. No, they're not screaming at me. So no one's saying, hey, what's going on? So we'll open it up. I will mute out. If you need me, find me in chat.
Okay, so we've still got.
And good luck.
Oh, we're on now?
No, well, once I disappear in a sec, you will be.
Yeah.
So
you can stay for a minute. We've still got 2 minutes to go. So
you want to make it right on dot that we let people in? Because then we can I just feel they can have the background, they can have the music,
sure.
and then you can
Okay,
you
that's
can
fine.
say you can speak up, Jeanette, and say, look, everyone, we're just going to wait a few minutes for everyone to come in, and yeah, when we think there's enough, I'll give you the nod.
Okay, so you'll let me know when there's enough to start.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to stop my video.
Hi, everybody. We're just waiting until 5 o'clock, and we'll give people a couple of minutes before we commence the session. So welcome to those who are here. Okay, well, it's a couple of minutes past 5, and I think that might be a good time to start. So welcome all. Good evening and welcome to our webinar on coming out of COVID for OCs, which is being hosted by the DRG, which is Docklands Representative Group, a community group comprised of, as the name suggests, of volunteer Docklandsers who are interested in improving local wellbeing and livability. Our interim president and also our tech support is Ben Ball, who is ably assisted this evening by Daniel Limmy, Aditi Rao and Jacqueline Graham, and myself, Jeanette Corcoran, and I'll be facilitating this evening's event. So welcome one and all. We currently have, I think the count is about 76 who have logged on, and we actually had 150 registrations, so we'll look how that pans out this evening. So tonight will mark a departure from the DRG's usual hands-on forum, as our events are usually targeted at Docklanders. But we thought with the issue of residential strata and with COVID, we knew that one was of real interest to our neighbours at South Bank and in the CBD. So we extended an invitation to our neighbours, and we're very pleased to have so many of them join us this evening. We'd like to start this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of country and to recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. The second point to note is that this session is being recorded, and access to the recording will be available through the DRG website in the near future, and that's just docklands.org.au. The third point to note is that we'll be conducting a number of polls this evening. The idea is to capture a few snapshots, so who is actually here and what your thoughts and experiences are. Your answers will be anonymous and the data will be aggregated, so there will be no direct links back to you. And our fourth point relates to the nature of our session tonight. Please be advised that the session tonight is providing general information only, and that the content does not constitute legal advice or recommendations and should not be relied upon as such. Appropriate legal advice should be obtained on actual situations. But speaking of capable legal advisors, we are very pleased to welcome here tonight someone well known to readers of CBD Docklands, Docklands News and South Bank News as a regular columnist on OC issues, Mr. Tom Bacon. Hi, Tom.
Thanks, Jeanette. Lovely to be here.
Great. Tom is the principal solicitor and CEO of Strata Title Lawyers, which he founded in June 2013 and operates in Melbourne as well as Sydney, which is really good so we can actually get a comparison of different strata approaches. And his firm provides international consultancy services to foreign governments on owners corporations issues and is currently advising reforms on Fiji strata legislation. So great to have you, Tom. And we're also very appreciative to have representatives of the Department of Justice and Community Safety, Mr. Angus Duncan and Miss Susan Zhao. So welcome to you both. Great to have you here this evening. So just a word of note, as representatives of the Department of Justice and Community Safety, Mr. Duncan and Mr. Zhao will answer factual questions regarding the Owners Corporation Act 2006 and the Owners Corporation Regulations 2018 and associated legislation as they currently stand. They will not be engaging in speculations involving hypothesis or a specific situation as regards individual owners corporations. Also, our guests won't be taking questions related to issues directed by the Chief Health Officer, and we suggest that questions regarding these be directed towards the Department of Health and Human Services. That said, welcome to you both and thank you for making the time this evening. Great, and this leads nicely onto our first point, which is about the format of tonight's session. As you would have seen in our promotional material, we are focusing on two issues related to OCs. And coming out of COVID, as we've called it. These two are related to opening common property and OC funding. And we chose these two because of some pre-investigation that we did with people, and we found that the same issues were coming up time and time again. And these were the areas that people were particularly struggling about. We know that there are a lot of other issues, and we've received many questions, particularly related to short stays. That's a significant topic in and of itself, and there is scope, depending upon feedback from tonight's session, for something like that to be held in the future. So essentially watch this space. So to kick off this evening, we thought we'd like to show you who else is actually attending with you on this webinar. So Ben will be launching our first poll, and It is this. It's 2 questions. As you can see, these are very similar to the questions that you answered when you registered. So essentially, what role that you play in the sector: apartment resident, apartment owner, committee member, building manager, etc. And you can tick as many of those as you like. The second question is basically about where you live or work. And so that's, again, you only can select one of those. And if you live in one area and work in another, just pick the one that you think is most meaningful. So we'll leave that out for a few more seconds. And once you have selected, just hit submit, and we'll get underway, and Ben will show the results. So Ben, have we got enough responses so far? Almost. We'll just. Great. So majority apartment owner, and closely followed by committee member. And a great percentage in Docklands. So that's great. Welcome. So a bit of scene setting. The vertical living sector. It's going to come as news to few of us that Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world, with around about 90% living in urban areas. And our cities, until COVID, have been really fast growing. The city of Melbourne, for instance, according to the latest Australian official population estimates, is the fastest growing municipality in Australia in percentage terms. As at 30 June 2019, just under 180,000 people were estimated to live in the city. That's the city of Melbourne. By 2029, that figure is estimated to increase to 276,000. By 2041, our population is expected to reach over 384,000. Now, COVID has thrown us a curveball, and these estimates are likely to vary, but that still leaves huge numbers living in the city of Melbourne, which marks a great change over the last 2 decades. The areas of greatest population will be in the CBD and South Bank. And these residents will be primarily living in high-rise, high-density, which typically means residential strata. An interesting aside, apart from our legal people, some of you may not know that strata title is actually an Australian innovation in property law that has been copied around the globe in various forms, including Canada, New Zealand, India, Fiji, Malaysia, Singapore, and South Africa. But the important point to note about residential strata, or as we're going to be referring to the sector, vertical living, it is sizable and it is a fast growing mode of living. According to the City of Melbourne itself, approximately 83% of residents within the City of Melbourne live in high-rise apartments. It is a mainstream way of living. The second point to note is that it is a different way of living. It's not synonymous with suburbs turned on their sides, which means we encounter a different set of problems than our ground-bound cousins. And that's a point recognised by the City of Melbourne in some of the programs that they've been involved in, like Neighbours for Apartments. However, the key distinguishing feature of vertical living is that we have our own tier of government, a 4th tier of government referred to as the Owners Corporation. And the committee that represents the OCs has more than a few similarities, both good and bad, with other tiers of government, like it being elected, and also faction forming is not uncommon. The focus of these OCs is to manage significant assets, the residential buildings, which are valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars and have operating budgets which far exceed those of many small to medium enterprises. Yet the OCs are staffed by volunteers, and there is no requirement for training and few resources to actually draw upon. So while many OCs are fortunate to have motivated and skilled people, they operate with little external support and oftentimes are just not on the radar for residential schemes. So when COVID hit, people were instructed to go home, stay from home, and work from home. And home for many meant high-rise apartments. And while COVID presented many challenges for all sectors, the challenges for residential strata were quite different. Rather than a slowdown, it was all hands on deck. Immediate decisions had to be made about self-isolation. Did people need to inform management? What needed to be done for them to actually exist within the building? Deliveries. How could food be delivered, including those in self-isolation? What about parcel delivery? How could the increase in volume be handled? Visitors, carers versus family. Who checks? Who monitors? Do we have the right to do this? Increased in waste because people were at home. How were that to be managed? Access to emergency services. The list is quite extensive about issues that had to be dealt with immediately. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar is all too familiar with the scope of these issues. And again, just to capture this, we have our second poll. So Ben, if you could put that up. This will actually just kind of show people what we actually had to do in common property. So how many people closed your gym? Did you close it? Did you leave it open? Did you restrict access? And the same to do with pools. Did you close? Did you leave it open? Did you restrict access? What happened is that each building decided their own course of action, which sounds reasonable, but which also means now we have a great variety of configurations. Some have totally shut down facilities and are closely monitoring their use, while others have taken a more laissez-faire approach, meaning that the residents or owners are informed, or it's their responsibility to inform themselves. And while we're still in a time of COVID, questions are starting to be asked about process. What could or should and has been done, especially in relation to the actual powers of owners' corporations. Already there are reports about threats to CU and VCAT if the gym isn't reopened, and also requests for fee decreases due to non-availability of facilities. So Ben, have we got the results of those? Yeah. So not surprising, 97% closed the gym and 86%, yeah. Well, everyone who had a pool basically closed it. Case in point, in a recent case in Queensland, Poinciana Park, the OC there restricted access to waste, which was on common property. But anyway, this case now, and I emphasise this was in Queensland, it's been returned that the OCs didn't have the power to do this. So this starts asking some very interesting questions. So this brings us to our first issue about reopening common property. And I'll first put this to our representatives from the Department of Justice and Community Safety. What powers do Victorian owners corporations have to close common property?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So I think the important thing to note at the outset is that in Victoria, owners corporations don't have any formal powers to restrict access to common property under the Owners Corporations Act, but they do have the power to make rules in relation to two things which may be relevant. The first is health, safety and security of lot owners and occupiers of lots and with their invitees. And also they have rules, they can make rules in relation to the use of the common property. The key consideration when making rules is that they can't unfairly discriminate against any lot owner or occupier, and they can't be inconsistent with the law. So that's the OC Act or its regulations, the Subdivision Act or its regulations, or any other act or regulation. Owners corporations who are wanting to make rules in this space may wish to seek some independent advice prior to putting anything up for a resolution. And in terms of how owners corporations go about reopening common property, the one piece of advice we can give is that it's important to comply with any directions issued by the Chief Health Officer in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. And for information on that, that's available on the DHHS website, which is www.dhhs.vic.gov.au/coronavirus.
Great, thanks. So Tom, given that many OCs have closed their facilities, and in fact things like lounges as well as gyms and pools, were there actions that they should have taken before closing these facilities?
Oh, it's a good question, Jeanette. I mean, the legislation itself, the Owners Corporation Act, is a bit of a minefield to navigate. I guess what I do echo what Angus has just said about powers under the Act in terms of an express power that actually says an owners corporation may close off part of the common property. But as Angus also said, you got the power to make rules. So the first port of call for owners corporations is to have a look at your registered rules. A lot of the larger residential buildings, the model rules or the rules that were filed by the developer when the building was first registered will have a rule that's already there that says that the committee may close off parts of the common property at any point in time if it feels as if there is a health and safety issue there. So I actually think that for a majority of the larger residential buildings, including some of the people that are listening to this webinar, they had this power, and the committees acted in lockstep with that rule by acting to close it. If they didn't have that rule registered on their plan of subdivision, then we have to go a bit further, because of course no one's got the time or had the time back in March when this all kicked off to go and have a special resolution ballot about whether to close the gym and the pool. It just had to be done. And so the Chief Medical Officer's advice to everyone at the time regarding the restrictions on gymnasiums and pools was in operation and was in full effect. And in respect of that, while the owners corporation itself didn't have powers, it is still subject to, of course, the Chief Medical Officer's directions. And not to get too technical, but Section 6 of the Owners Corporation Act says that an owners corporation has all of the powers, duties and functions under the Owners Corporation Act and its regulations, under the Subdivision Act and its regulations, and any other law. And it also has another out and says that it's got all other powers that are necessary to enable it to comply with its functions. And one of its functions being, of course, is to manage and administer the common property and, of course, the health, safety and enjoyment of all of the occupiers and the owners. So very, very, very wide powers. And, of course, we've also got the requirement that an owners corporation has to act in good faith and with due care and diligence. And that's a duty that applies to owners corporations, and it also applies individually to committee members as well. They are also under that duty to act in good faith and with due care and diligence. Now, I don't think that there could be any suggestion that in seeking to follow the orders of the Chief Medical Officer in saying close down your gyms and pools. Now, yes, those were public facilities that the Chief Medical Officer was talking about, but also extends to private property as well, because of course we were all required to take ourselves off from our workplaces and sequester ourselves in our homes for a period of time. So in essence, I don't think that there's any legal standing for anyone to bitterly complain about the decision to close off the gym and the pool. It's now, I guess, the matter is how best do we safely reopen those facilities, and that might lead on to our next point.
Indeed it does. So here's the situation. As from June 22, the Victorian government is introducing changes. So up to 50 people will be allowed inside a large range of venues, including cinema, theatre and cafes. Indoor sports centres and gyms will also be able to reopen to a maximum of 20 people per space and a cap of 10 people per group of adults. So the question is, what powers and responsibilities do OCs have when reopening these facilities? And maybe either Angus or Susan, would you like to start that off?
I'm happy to answer that one again. Again, there's no specific powers under the OC Act. Our primary advice would be that owners corporations should comply with the directions of the Chief Health Officer, as well as any general duties that are in place under the Act. So the duty to act in the best interests of lot owners, to have due care and diligence, just to be mindful of those particular duties as they stand under the Act. But there's no specific powers and responsibilities in relation to reopening facilities.
Great. Susan, did you want to add anything?
No, that's all right. Thank you, Jeanette.
No problem. So Tom, as mentioned, these facilities have been closed, and there's already a lot of variation in how OCs intend to lift their restrictions. For example, some are tightly controlling them. They've discussed about having a limited number of fobs, say 10 fobs, that people have to pre-book, and they are monitored. Other buildings are going to be much more laissez-faire. They're going to maybe cordon off some equipment if it's deemed to be too close, but they're essentially going to let residents manage themselves to interpret it. Have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it in a few different ways. So when these restrictions lift, as you've just introduced, Jeanette, on the 22nd of June, that will, it doesn't mean that compulsorily everything's open again. It just means you can open. So that's the first distinction. For those categories of buildings that have this registered rule that has permitted the owners corporation to close off certain areas of common property if they deem it to be unsafe, or while they set things up properly and socially distance equipment and set up pool lanes, all that sort of thing, then they're under no compulsion to automatically reverse their decision on the 22nd of June. They can take their time and ascertain their own risk within their own building. For the categories of buildings out there that don't have that rule, then also they're not under a strict compulsion to open either, but they should be doing so if it's safe to do so. In terms of how that's best done, a couple of my legal colleagues have suggested and been publishing articles regarding the fact that an owners corporation could be sued if they reopen facilities and somebody contracts COVID-19. Now, while I would agree that an owners corporation is able to be sued because it can be sued like any other person, and while it could be sued if there was some sort of egregious breach, but it's all a matter of causation and proof. I would struggle to think that a court could ever find that the only possible contact this person that contracted coronavirus could be found to have been by touching a doorknob in an apartment building that led to the gymnasium. That would be that type of medical tracing technology just does not exist yet. It's something out of science fiction. But the risk is still there, and as I said, the owners corporations do have a duty of good faith and must act with due care and diligence. If an owners corporation is deciding, all right, we'd like to reopen and we believe it's safe to do so, and we're going to introduce a booking system or restrict the fobs to the gymnasium or to the pool area for the 20 persons to come in and use the pool at one time. If that is able to be done so on the building management control system and through signage, I think that's an excellent step, and I think that that's a very safe step to do, and I would encourage owners corporations to put up a robust process about that. Whether or not you have to go so far as to put on additional building staff to police this, to actually count people coming in and coming out like a bouncer in a nightclub, no, that's not a requirement. That's probably not even a good thing that the owners corporation should do, not unless an owners corporation has a budget of millions of dollars a year to throw around and can afford to deploy staff doing that. But I don't think that's necessary. If the building management control system can control that, and if signage can control that, and a sign-in, sign-out sheet, all of those sorts of things, maybe even a declaration to say, I do not have any of the symptoms. All of that's a fantastic idea. It should be looked into. The building management, the cleaning contractors, the security staff, the OC manager, they should all be talking about that with their committees in a bid to reopen these facilities as soon as it is safe to do so. But it's up to the committees to ascertain for themselves when is the right time to open these facilities, when is it safe to do so. As I said, they do have this legal duty that's upon them, and while it's incredibly remote, in a bizarre world, an owners corporation could be sued if someone does contract coronavirus. But I think proving that is too far remote to ever say that it's a real risk. But of course, this is we have to follow the medical advice of our chief medical officers, and all of the medical advice suggests that there's a very low risk of community transmission, but it is still out there. And this virus tends to harbour itself within seemingly asymptomatic and healthy individuals for a long period of time. So it's very difficult to judge.
Right. And thanks, Tom. And we had a couple of specific questions. So Regina asked whether an OC, the commercial gyms have instructors to make sure that social distancing and the equipment is wiped down and that sort of thing. And I think Ben also asks about how much is there an obligation on the OC to ensure that things are properly cleaned down? And that's also a question by Eric about policing things. So we can open them and we can have the facilities there, but and the process is there. Do we have a responsibility to ensure that it's done?
Well, cleaning equipment, absolutely. The cleaning contractors for each building need to be absolutely on their game. All buildings should have already implemented extra cleaning contractors or doubled the existing cleaning contractors' presence on site, and they should be taking extra care to wipe down the gymnasium and the pool areas and all the doors and all the other high frequency contact areas with special cleaning products, not just your regular cleaning products. And all of that should be signposted to reassure residents throughout the building that all of this is being done. The cleaning contractors should be logging. If they're going into the gymnasium, the pool area, they need to be logging how many times they're doing it. Whether that needs to be done once a day, twice a day, 5 times a day, all of that sort of thing needs to be sorted out. I think that there needs to be some bacterial wipes and some spray that's actually in the gym for the individual users to use. And again, signage everywhere to say every time you use a piece of equipment, wipe it down afterwards. All of that's very good. Having lifeguards in the pool or instructors to sort of do all of that. No, this is private property. As I said, you can, an owner's corporation has a very remote chance of being sued in the case of a personal injury or anything like that if they misuse gym equipment. But that's an entirely different matter as opposed to using a piece of gym equipment and contracting COVID-19, because a gym instructor is not going to be able to stop that from happening. And I think that's overkill. So I'm not going to be recommending that anyone goes out there and employs cleaning contractors or instructors to wipe down every piece of equipment. People have to take responsibility for themselves.
Okay.
The corporation's not there to mollycoddle everyone.
Thanks for that. Moving on. During COVID, many buildings restricted access, no visitors, and they organised special arrangement for deliveries, food and parcel, which goes to the issue of access. So the next question is about access. And Angus or Susan, what powers do OCs have in restricting non-resident access to common property?
So again, as I said earlier, there's no formal powers under the Act to restrict access to common property. But again, owners corporations can make rules in relation to certain matters, including the use of the common property. The one thing I would say again is that rules just have to be consistent. They can't consistent with the law, and they can't unfairly discriminate against any particular lot owner or occupier. But there's no specific powers to restrict access to common property under the Act.
So Tom, a lot of buildings, as I said, they actually implemented new protocols for takeaway food and deliveries. A lot of them had people leaving things outside and had to be sprayed down. They required residents to come down, or if they were at self-isolation, there had to be some arrangements made for them to bring out. So we've got a question from David, but basically to ask about what are the powers and responsibility of owners to require all deliveries be made at or outside the front entrance and ban delivery people from entering the common area? And then I've got a follow-up one, which is Eric asked about the rights to actually take someone's temperature before allowing access to common property if they don't live there.
Okay, well, let's start with the easy one first. Uber Eats, Deliveroo comes to your door, buzzes your intercom. Now, a lot of this is actually taken out of the owner's corporation hands, because I'm aware that a lot of delivery driver companies or even just the individuals that are doing these deliveries have a preference or have a policy that they're not coming in for their own safety. So it's in a lot of instances, it's going to be the delivery drivers that are saying, no, you have to come down. I'm not coming into your building. And I'm just going to leave it on the floor, and you come down and grab it because I don't want to touch you. And that's I mean, obviously this is a private arrangement between a resident or an owner and a delivery driver about deliveries. So if one party's not comfortable to come in, then that's that. But let's assume that the building has said this is the policy, no one comes in. Now, as Angus said, we've got the power to make rules. In the model rules, and for a lot of the owners corporations with their developer rules that have been registered with the plans of subdivision, there's existing rules in there about about invitees, and about what they can do and cannot do when they attend the property at the request of a resident or an owner. So again, the residents themselves have their own powers about whether they can permit entry or not. But obviously, if they do permit entry, then those residents or those owners take responsibility for their invitees. So I'm sort of beating around the bush with this. I don't have a problem with owners, corporations, and committees making policies about how deliveries can be done, and whether it's done through the concierge or whether it's done by going outside to collect the item and then come back in. At the end of the day, that interface with the intercom and with the front doors, that is such a high traffic area, and often these doors are funnel points. They're very small and narrow, and that's the one place of the common property where you're most likely to bump into high rates of people coming and going. And so any way that we can restrict people from bumping into each other or using those doors and using those intercoms, and making sure that the cleaning contractors have the time to spray everything down multiple times a day so that we don't get community transmission. I think that's a process which we absolutely must follow, and I'd always draw us back to an owners corporation's duty to act in good faith, and remembering that we're not just constrained by the Owners Corporation Act, but we also have an owners corporation must also act in accordance with all of the laws, and also act with as much freedom as possible to ensure that it can administer all of its functions, being of course the use and administration of common property. So an owners corporation has very, very wide powers, and therefore the committee has very wide powers here. So I don't think that anyone's going to be running off to VCAT saying that my pizza got cold because the delivery driver left it out on the porch and I wasn't able to collect it, or someone stole it. I don't think VCAT's going to be fighting against an owners corporation for that.
Right, thanks, Tom. So we'll move on now to our second theme, which is about OC funding. As we're likely all aware, COVID-19 has brought financial stress to many. In terms of vertical living, owners have faced job losses, and if they were investors, oftentimes their rental income might have been greatly decreased. These factors impact upon an owner's ability to pay their OC fees, which, as we know, is the key source of finance for our residential buildings. Now, if you add to that the additional costs incurred by COVID-19 on building operations, such as additional cleaning, increased security for some buildings, hand hygiene products, things like that, it's easy to see that a reduced income plus increased expenses do not make for a happy financial situation. So before I go to the experts, we thought we might just take another snap poll about the financial stress that some of our buildings are in at the moment. So this poll, actually, it's got 3 questions. So if you scroll down, and it's basically asking you, have you experienced an increase in late OC fees? So yes, significantly, yes, but only a small increase, no, not significant. The second one is about requests for OC fee payment plans. Again, yes, many, yes, only a few, or no. And then the third question relates to, have you received many inquiries for OC fee reductions because of closed facilities? Again, yes, many, yes, only a few, or no. So if people could click on that, and Ben will then put up the results. But Susan and Angus, while people are responding, perhaps you could start us off by telling us what powers OCs have in regard to OC fees and interests. You know, can they reduce, can they waive, can they defer?
I guess what I would say at the outset is that fees are determined by the owners corporation. So they're based on their own costs, what estimated costs are for a range of factors. And the owners corporation can also determine the times for payment of fees. So with that in mind, we recognise that the government recognises that the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in financial difficulties for many property owners, and if owners corporations are in the process of setting fees or collecting fees for the year, they might want to consider adopting measures to minimise financial hardship. So things like payment by instalment or providing a grace period for late payments. Of course, there is always the power to amend approved budgets, which I think is one of your later questions, but that would require a resolution of the owners corporation. The other thing we would say is that if there are lot owners concerned about their ability to pay fees that are falling due over the coming months, they should raise that with the owners corporation as soon as possible, so that a plan of action can be formulated, and they may wish to contact an independent advisor to discuss what assistance might be available.
Great, thank you, Angus. So, Tom, on the topic of reducing and or waiving, there appears to be some remedies. Oh, here we go. Late, so it doesn't seem to be significantly in a few. So, a lot of people perhaps on this call may not are privy to it. So, looks like there has been a significant late fee, and also the building request for late fee payment. Well, there's been a few of those, so I think that's together, so about, well, almost 50% really. And in terms of building inquiries for fee reductions, so again, about 20%, so, and 40% are unsure. So I know that there's been talk in some OC management fields about between 25 and 40% of OC fees being late. So it could be something that's on the horizon, but again, sometimes we might be able to skate through these things, but I think it's something that we need to be really mindful of about our cash flow in that area. But Tom, on the topic about owners wanting a discount because they can't use building facilities, or we have a question from Eric who asks whether owners have a right to be compensated because they can't use the common properties. What's your thoughts?
Well, nice try. Good luck with that argument in VCAT. But of course, what I should say is you can't hold the owners corporation to ransom. The fees are the fees. I know that it seems like from a commercial bargaining point of view, well, how dare you charge me, $1,200 for this quarter in levies? I wasn't able to use the pool and the gym, and I would otherwise place a value of that of $50 a month if I went down to Jets Fitness or one of the other gymnasiums. So therefore, I'm going to deduct this, and I'm going to offer to pay you XYZ dollars. That won't fly. What I would say is that a lot of owners are going to be getting reduced fees anyway, because pools, particularly the heating of pools, use up such a lot of electricity and cost so much that inevitably, by having them turned off or turned down or not having them used, is going to lead to a much lower power consumption. So all owners will share in that, and I'm sure that's of cold comfort. But certainly, there's no way to enforce a discount or to get compensation for that, because it's just impossible to draw the line as to what value you can put on access to a gym or a pool relative to your fees. And of course, there are very extenuating circumstances here. We've got a global pandemic and an owners corporation at the end of the day has statutory duties to keep the lights on, and it has to pay its bills. But of course, whether the owners corporation wants to extend discounts because it's in a reasonably healthy financial spot, and if it wants to say, look, we recognise that because the pool and the gym are closed and have been for the last 3 months, and we're not going to open them for another 1 or 2 months, it seems fair to discount all of your fees for the next quarter by a percentage amount. Of course, the owners corporation may decide to do so, and I can come in due course to the powers that an owners corporation would have for that argument. But sort of as a sign of goodwill, there's nothing to prevent an owners corporation from doing that. But certainly an owner can't wriggle off their obligations by saying that we're not paying.
Thanks. So moving on to budgets. In Queensland, their Parliament have just passed an emergency bill amending their Body Corporate and Community Act, where sinking funds can be altered by ordinary resolution at a general meeting until the end of the year. Now, in this case, the funds are refunded, they're not credited, and that has a lot of implications. That's not happening here, I'll just make that clear. But in terms of Victoria, so Angus and Susan, what power do the owners corporations in Victoria have to transfer between maintenance funds and administered funds and or amend approved budgets?
So in relation to the maintenance fund and administrative fund, generally speaking, you can only pay out money from the maintenance fund in accord to service the approved maintenance plan. But section, I want to say 44 of the Act, bear with me 1 second. Yes, section 44 of the Act does allow money to be paid out of the maintenance fund if the owners corporation approves it by special resolution. So that if there is an intention that perhaps there is an excess of money in the maintenance fund that may need to be paid out, it would need to be approved by special resolution of the owners corporation. Of course, again, owners corporation members may wish to seek independent advice before putting forward any resolution regarding an extraordinary payment, but that would appear to be the mechanism for that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Tom, we've received a question from David, and he's in a building which he says has a fair percentage of short stays and a lower percentage of owner occupiers. And he asks that several weeks ago he received notice that following pressure from lot owners that a special budget review that the financial year 21 maintenance fund contributions would be reduced by 50%. And he believes that that's related to the pressure from short stay owners because they're experiencing financial hardship. He's asking, what's the process there, or do you have a comment on that?
I sure do, Jeanette. Maybe I'd just like to go back to your last question, though, the question that you posed to Angus before we get to that, because the thing is that the owners corporation can't touch the money that's in the maintenance fund account without a special resolution. Special resolutions are incredibly difficult to get passed at the best of times, let alone in the middle of a pandemic. There's no opportunity to have meetings, a special general meeting with more than 20 persons at the moment. So, and that's even with all the social distancing. So we have to do it by way of ballots. That means that we have to even get an interim special resolution, we've got to get at least 50% of the lot entitlements of an owners corporation to return those ballots, and then that's for an interim special resolution. And if they all say yes, let's touch the maintenance fund accounts and access that, then that's got to wait for a further period of 29 days before it becomes a special resolution. For large owners corporations, which might have a large number of investors or foreign owners, it's virtually impossible to touch or to get a special resolution passed. So there is a real crisis, I would suggest, in Victoria. Queensland has seen the light and has passed those interim or emergency measurements to allow owners corporations to access the maintenance accounts. At the end of the day, the whole point of a maintenance fund is to save for a rainy day. Well, guess what? It's raining cats and dogs right now. It might not be that the roof is falling in, but there is still, for at least some owners corporations out there, a real cash flow crisis that's going to really hit when the next quarter of fees are done. I think everyone's done okay for the last few months, but it's really going to bite between now and Christmas. In New South Wales, there is an existing provision in the legislation that allows for an owners corporation to pinch money from the Capital Works Fund, the maintenance fund, as long as it has a plan for repaying that money over a certain period of time. But in Victoria, we've got nothing. So I would really be calling on the government that they need to jump back into the debating chambers and quickly come up with some interim relief here. It's time to look at these types of issues, because for a lot of owners corporations out there, the only possible way, if people aren't paying their levies, then the owners corporation has to look at getting a loan. And even getting a loan, you might still have to pass an ordinary resolution or a special resolution, depending on the amount. And that means you're back to getting a ballot. And of course, the loans, last time I looked, the interest rates were hovering around about 8% per annum. That doesn't sound like too much, but compared to home mortgage rates and interest rates have been at an all-time low, it's certainly a bit galling for owners corporations to be locked into having to take loans when they've got potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there in their maintenance funds, and they're being prevented from doing so only because they live in the great state of Victoria. So I call upon any government or any politicians who are listening to this webinar, take that out to your constituents and get in there and draft up some emergency measures.
How timely, Tom. I think there might be a few kind of listening. So we'll continue the conversation. So our final issue, I suppose, and this almost touches upon our discussion a little before, but it's the flip side. It's about funding strategies, and some buildings are considering a user pays model, which, if you think about it, it's kind of a variation about restricting access. So they're looking at maybe trying to recoup additional COVID-related expenses. For example, if people use meeting rooms and it has to be, as we're referring to it, COVID cleaned afterwards. So the question, and maybe we start with Angus and Susan, is that does the OC have the power to adopt a user pays model for additional COVID-related expenses when they're using common property?
The answer to that question is no. There's no power under the OC Act and to permit differential charging of lot owners for the use of the common property. No.
That's fairly definitive. So Tom, are OCs required to undertake that sort of COVID clean if they're using things like meeting rooms? We can understand gyms really need to be kept very clean, but would they need such a thorough clean in conference rooms or meeting rooms?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, obviously, for the safety of all residents, there's a standing duty that, of course, the owners corporation has to maintain and repair the common property, and in these very unusual times, that means additional cleaning. Moving towards some form of system of a user pays. We do have in Victoria what's called the Mashane principle, the Mashane principle. That comes from Section 49 of the Act, which does provide a power for an owners corporation to recover as a debt the cost of maintenance, other works that are undertaken solely or wholly or partially for the benefit of some but not all lot owners. So you've got that as a bare power. The question is, can you really drill down and come up with a definitive cost, and then can you pass that on to those owners that are using those facilities? I guess as a hypothetical, the power was there, but I do cast doubt on whether or not in practice you can actually drill down into all those costs and come up with it. Maybe you could, and maybe an owners corporation could say, that if an owner or a group of owners only is going to be using part of the common property, let's say they want to rent out a dining room or a media room. Some buildings have those types of facilities. Maybe that's what the question is geared towards. And if that's the case, then we can potentially impose that as an administration fee, and that would be the power of Section 49 to recover it.
There is also Section 14 of the Act, which does permit the leasing or licensing of common property by special resolution, which may be, if you're talking about use of a particular room on common property, that may be something that could be utilised by owners' corporations. But again, I would the department would recommend owners' corporations seek independent advice before taking any particular course of action in relation to that.
Just finally, we've got a question about, and this goes into the areas about short stays, and could they be charged for additional expenses, increases in insurance and cleaning because it's exposing people to more risk? Is there any basis in argument there? I'm handballing that to you, Tom.
The answer, unfortunately, is no. What I did just say to my previous question was, okay, we've got Section 49. It does provide a power, a bare power for an owner's corporation to recover these types of costs. I guess the question is, how do we accurately calculate those costs? I've had answers before from insurers where the question has been posed to them, how much more is our policy because we have short stays in our building? And what the insurers have consistently said is nothing. We don't charge you any extra, whether you have one short stay or whether you have 150 short stays in your building. So I don't think that insurance is an issue, unless insurers are going to start charging more in a new environment. As far as extra cleaning is concerned, well, or extra wear and tear coming through the common property, these are the complaints that existed from many owners' corporations well before COVID-19 came in. It's that extra wear and tear. It's all those that luggage and those cleaning trolleys coming in on a daily basis, and of course all the badly behaved guests that are coming here for a good time, not a long time. And all of those issues have been well played out in Victoria, both in court cases and in the halls of Parliament, and that led to the change in laws by the Labor government in relation to powers to owners' corporations to do certain things about badly behaving guests at Airbnb. But really and surely the Labor government has been a very soft touch on short stays and Airbnbs, and has allowed them to operate 365 days of the year with impunity. Whereas other states around Australia and in fact around the world, other cities have taken a very strong view against short-term stays. I don't think there's anything under the current laws that can be done. The government has shut the door on throwing the book at short stays in this regard. So we either have to rally around to change the laws, or we have to just live with it.
Thank you, Tom. And so this actually brings us to the close of our session. There's obviously many more conversations to be had, and I believe the City of Melbourne is heading down this track with very fast, which is great news. So Angus and Susan, would you like to make any closing remarks regarding the OC Act and regulations about coming out of COVID?
No specific closing remarks. I would just, again, if any residents are seeking and owners corporations are seeking advice in relation to the issues, visit the DHHS website for any information on the Chief Health Officer's directions, and for any information in relation to the regulation of owners corporations, visit the Consumer Affairs Victoria website or contact Consumer Affairs Victoria directly.
Thank you, Angus. And Tom, any last words?
Yes, sure. I mean, this is such an awful situation for the whole world to be in, let alone if you're in Victoria and an owners corporation. We're heading for a massive wipeout of the property investment sector, in particular anyone who is a landlord whether you're in short stay or long stay, is in for a really rough ride over a few years, and poor old owners corporations are going to be really stuck, because these buildings that we all live in, they're very expensive, and as they continue to age, the assets are going to continue to degrade, and the cost of maintenance is only going up, not down. And we're in an environment where everyone's property values are not going up, and everyone's personal incomes and household incomes are not going up, and in some instances they've gone down to zero if people have been laid off or had their hours reduced. So we're on course for the most challenging times that the property sector has seen in such a long time. And the unfortunate thing is that owners corporations have long been considered by the industry that services them to be a bit of a soft touch, because statutorily the owners corporations are compelled to maintain and repair their assets. And obviously over a period of history, the developers that have set these buildings up have awarded very non-competitive service contracts for very long periods of time for very non-competitive rates of pay to these companies, and the poor old owners corporations are left with very high fees. And these will all be coming into the spotlight now, and a lot of treasurers and subcommittees and committees will be looking at all of their fixed costs and thinking, golly gee, how are we going to get out of this one without taking a loan or without dipping into the maintenance fund? It's going to be incredibly difficult over the next 6 to 12 months. I would be recommending that committees do their best to negotiate with their existing contractors to see if they can't get a better deal out of them. They should be deferring potentially all non-essential capital works or infrastructure works that they haven't pushed the button on yet, because they really need to, on the one hand, we need to maintain and repair our plants and equipment. We can't have the elevators going down or the fire systems going down, but we need to be able to negotiate with our contractors, because anyone who runs a business that services the owners corporation industry needs to understand that the gravy train is over, and the high rates of profit that they've been milking from the sector need to change now, because we're in a low cost environment. Certainly no prices should be going up, in my view, and owners corporations need to tighten the belt. And I can foresee that there's going to be a little bit of litigation coming out of owners corporations trying to get out of non-competitive service contracts, because they're just paying sometimes 40, 50, 100% over the market odds. And that needs to change.
Thanks, Tom. Just to close off, we're launching our final poll, which is basically asking 2 questions. If you're interested in another strata session, yes, no, or depends on the topic, and if you are, what you'd be interested in hearing about: short stays, follow-up COVID, cladding, sustainability, dysfunctional committees. That seems to have come up a fair bit. And so while you're completing this, I'll again let you know that this recording will be available on the DRG website likely next week, and that everyone registered tonight will receive follow-up communication with links. And for those Docklanders, the next Docklands Community Forum will likely be upon the waterways, so stay tuned. And finally, a very great thank you to our panellists from the Department of Justice and Community Safety. Thank you, Angus, and thank you, Susan. We really appreciate your taking the time to participate in this. And from Strata Title Lawyers, Mr. Tom Bacon, thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate the time and trouble that you've taken to do this. And a special shout out to the City of Melbourne for your support of the DRG through the community grant. And I'm wondering, Ben, have we got the results of that yet? Okay, so it looks like people would like to come back, 85%. That's not too bad. And unsurprisingly, short stays, follow-up COVID. So it looks like we might be chatting again in the future. So thank you all, and thanks for all the participants and the attendees. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Okay.
Thanks, Ram.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Good.
I think that was fairly good feedback. So